I knew this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Family dinners had always been a battleground, subtle jabs masked as casual remarks, unspoken competition woven into every conversation. But tonight, something felt different. There was an edge to the air, a shift in the usual script. My sisters sat across from me, their smiles bright, their hair immaculate, each the perfect embodiment of everything I could never seem to be. And then, just as the wine glasses were refilled and the laughter had settled into a comfortable lull, Clara raised hers with a dazzling smile that had always charmed a room before she even spoke. "We've decided to go on an all-expenses-paid luxury cruise," she announced, her voice rich with excitement. "Just the three of us." She paused, letting the words settle, letting them land exactly where she intended. Her gaze flickered briefly in my direction, just long enough to acknowledge my presence, but not long enough to suggest I was included. The air shifted, thickened. I tried to smile, tried to pretend that my heart hadn't just tightened in my chest. I already knew the answer to the question no one would ask outright: would I be invited? And yet, somehow, the silence that followed was louder than any spoken words. Growing up, the difference between my sisters and me had always been unspoken but painfully clear. Sarah and Jessica were everything a parent could hope for: driven, ambitious, effortlessly successful. Sarah, the eldest, had climbed the corporate ladder with practiced ease, now an executive at a prestigious financial firm, her office a gleaming high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Jessica, just a step behind, had carved a name for herself in real estate, selling sprawling multi-million-dollar estates to clients whose lives mirrored her own. Both had married well, handsome, successful husbands who completed the glossy picture they had spent years perfecting. And then there was me. I had chosen a different path, one that never quite fit within the polished world they inhabited. I worked for a non-profit, dedicating my time to causes that mattered but never paid enough to afford anything more than a modest apartment and a wardrobe of second-hand suits. My career was fulfilling in ways money couldn't touch, but in the eyes of my family, it was little more than a well-intentioned hobby, a choice that had left me struggling on the fringes of their world. "Oh, that's wonderful," someone at the table chimed in, and just like that, the excitement swelled again, my sisters basking in the glow of their own generosity. I stayed silent. Then Sarah, as if just remembering I was still at the table, turned toward me. "Well, I'm sure you'll be fine staying back, right?" she said, her voice smooth, almost sympathetic. "I know how passionate you are about your work and all." She said it as if it were a fact. As if my passion automatically meant I couldn't possibly afford such a trip. The muscles in my jaw tightened. The conversation carried on without me, my sisters seamlessly falling into their usual rhythm of shared excitement, their words layered with the casual privilege of people who had never needed to hesitate before spending. "The Maldives isn't cheap," Sarah mused, swirling her wine. "We'll be staying in a private villa." I checked the prices. Honestly, it's kind of ridiculous how much these places cost. She laughed lightly, the sound effortless, before adding, "But what's money when you're spending time with family, right?" Jessica sighed in agreement, then glanced at me, her smile tightening at the corners. "It's kind of crazy, though, isn't it? I mean, with the kind of work you do, I'm sure you wouldn't be able to take time off for something like this. And it's probably not in the budget either." There it was. The assumption. The judgment disguised as casual observation. They weren't just assuming I couldn't afford it. They were implying that my life choices had led me here, to this moment, to this seat at the table where I would always be the outsider looking in. I exhaled slowly, my fingers curling around the stem of my glass. "I'm not asking for your charity," I said, my voice even, though there was an edge beneath it. "But thank you for assuming I couldn't afford it." For the first time that evening, the conversation faltered. Jessica hesitated, then leaned forward, her smile bright but too deliberate, the kind of sweetness laced with something else, pity, perhaps, or condescension. "I've got an idea," she said, her tone light, her voice slipping into that familiar cadence people used when they thought they were being generous. "Since you won't be able to join us, maybe you'd like to take care of the kids while we're away." The words hit like a slap. "It's a big favor," she continued, her smile unwavering, "but we could really use your help. You'd be doing us a huge service." For a moment, all I could do was stare. They had excluded me without a second thought, dismissed me without hesitation, yet they had no qualms about asking me to stay behind and play caretaker while they sailed off into the sunset. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. To them, I wasn't just different. I was lesser. A convenient afterthought. I set my glass down carefully, swallowing back the words that burned at the back of my throat. This wasn't just another family dinner. This was the moment I realized I had never really been part of their world at all. The weight of the insult settled deep in my chest, heavy and suffocating. To them, this was a reasonable compromise. I wasn't good enough to share in the luxury of the vacation, but I was good enough to stay behind and tend to their children, to keep their lives in order while they indulged in their own version of paradise. I looked around the table, searching for some sign of hesitation, some flicker of discomfort in their faces. But all I found was quiet acceptance, the silent understanding that this was the natural order of things. They truly believed I should be grateful. Grateful for the scraps of inclusion they tossed my way, grateful to serve a purpose while they sipped champagne on sun-drenched balconies overlooking an ocean I would never see. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, disbelief quickly giving way to anger. Did they really think this was a fair offer? Were they so blind to my autonomy, so dismissive of my worth, that they believed I should be honored to stay behind while they disappeared into their world of privilege? I took a slow, measured breath, forcing down the bitter frustration rising inside me. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, but the weight of my words cut through the air like a blade. "I'm not a babysitter, Jessica," I said, my tone steady, unwavering. "And I'm not some consolation prize for your vacation." The shift in the room was immediate. Sarah's brows lifted, taken aback by the quiet force in my voice. Jessica's lips parted slightly, her surprise morphing into something unreadable. For the first time in a long while, they weren't the ones in control of the conversation. But I wasn't done. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral as if I were carefully considering their offer. Letting them believe, for just a moment longer, that I was willing to play my role. But inside, something in me had already shifted. I was done being the outsider. Done being the afterthought, the one they assumed would always fall in line. That night, while the rest of my family relished in the details of their upcoming trip, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, my fingers flying across my keyboard. Flights. Hotels. Activities. I combed through every possibility, every detail, my heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to exhilaration. I wasn't going to stay behind. I wasn't going to watch them leave me behind once again, trapped in a role they had written for me long ago. If they could go to the Maldives, so could I. I remained silent in the family group chat, ignoring their messages, their plans, their unspoken expectation that I would slip seamlessly into the role they had assigned me. Let them assume. Let them believe I would be waiting at home, ready to step in when they needed me. But I was done waiting. A few days later, the moment finally arrived. We had arranged to meet for coffee, a final discussion to solidify the logistics of their trip, and my supposed role in it. Sarah and Jessica were already deep in conversation when I arrived, their voices brimming with excitement, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath my calm exterior. They didn't notice the way I straightened my shoulders. They didn't sense the shift in the air as I took a slow sip of my coffee, grounding myself in the decision I had already made. Then, finally, I spoke. "I've been thinking about your offer." Jessica looked up, expectant, already assuming she knew what I would say. "And I've decided that I won't be the one staying behind to take care of the kids." The words landed like a stone, sinking into the space between us. Sarah blinked, caught off guard, and Jessica's frown deepened, clearly waiting for the explanation that would make sense to them. An excuse, a reason that fit into the narrative they had crafted for me. But I gave them none. "Actually," I continued, my voice smooth, deliberate, "I've made other plans. I'll be traveling as well." Confusion flickered across their faces. "I'm going to Bali," I said, letting the word settle before delivering the final blow. "And after that, I'll be in the Maldives. Different dates, different resort, but I'll be there." Silence. Thick, absolute. For the first time, I saw something shift in their expressions. A flicker of recognition. They hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected me to take control, to carve my own path, to do something so entirely outside the version of me they had always known. For years, they had assumed they understood me. Assumed they knew my limitations, my place. But in that moment, I saw it, the realization that they had underestimated me. The wave of vindication that washed over me was intoxicating. They scrambled to adjust, to manipulate, to reshape the narrative. Sarah leaned in, her voice softer now, almost coaxing. "Come on, you don't have to go alone. Just come with us. It's not too late to change your mind." Jessica tried a different approach, her voice tinged with false warmth. "But don't you want to spend time with the family? It won't be the same without you." I met their gazes, unflinching. "No," I said simply. I've made my decision. I'm going on my own. From the other side of the table, my parents exchanged uneasy glances, my mother's voice laced with concern as she gently suggested, "Sweetheart, maybe you could reconsider. This isn't a competition. You don't have to prove anything." But that was where they were wrong. This wasn't about competition. This wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about me finally choosing myself. I straightened, my voice firm. "I don't need your approval," I said, letting the truth settle over them like the final stroke of a masterpiece. "I'm going to the Maldives. Alone. My choices are just as valid as yours." The weight of expectation, of years spent trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me, lifted from my shoulders. And for the first time, I felt free. As I boarded my flight days later, I stared out the window, watching the city shrink beneath me. A strange, beautiful sense of peace wrapped around me. For once, I wasn't tangled in the exhausting web of trying to belong in a space that had never truly welcomed me. I was no longer seeking their validation. I was no longer bound by their unspoken rules. The true luxury wasn't in the five-star resort waiting for me. It wasn't in the pristine beaches or the endless blue of the ocean. It was in this moment, this choice, the undeniable truth that I had finally reclaimed my own life. Looking back, I realized success was never about wealth, or status, or fitting into someone else's version of what life should be. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, to define my happiness on my own terms. And as the plane soared higher, carrying me toward a future that was entirely mine, I smiled, because for the first time in my life, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.